At 4:19 in the morning on September 14th, 1970, Sister Imelda Frayne found 13 nuns kneeling in the west corridor of the Convent of Our Lady of the Narrow Mercy in Harpers Ferry, West Virginia, with their backs to the chapel door. They had begun with Amen. Sister Imelda knew this because she heard the word before she reached the top of the stairs. It came from 13 mouths at once, low and exact, followed by the final sentence of Compline, spoken in reverse order. The words themselves were recognizable, but they arrived from end to beginning, each one placed carefully behind the one that should have followed it. No sister hurried, no sister stumbled. They sounded less like women making an error than women obeying a rule that had been waiting for them in their sleep. The corridor lamps were off. A gray pre-dawn light rested against the narrow windows, and beyond them, Harper's Ferry lay folded between the dark ridges, the two rivers hidden under a belt of summer haze. The nuns wore night veils and black wool habits despite the heat. Their hands lay palms down on the floorboards. At the end of every reversed line, they drew breath only after they had spoken. Sister Imelda called Mother Celestine's name. The 13 women answered with a response that should have come several seconds later. Then the chapel door shook beneath an impact from the other side. Sister Imelda stepped around the kneeling women and tried the knob. It was locked. She had the key on her belt. She was the convent infirmarian, and there was no hour in which she could not enter the chapel if an elderly sister had fallen during prayer. She fitted the key, but the lock turned away from it. The metal pushed her hand back with steady pressure, as though another key were being used from within. The nuns reached the beginning of the prayer. Silence followed. Not ordinary silence, but the held, listening quiet of a room after a verdict. The chapel door opened inward. Sister Damaris stood behind it. She was 81, small enough that the bronze memorial plaque against her chest covered most of her habit. Her white veil had slipped to one side. Blood ran from one nostril and had dried along the corner of her mouth. She stared at Sister Imelda without recognition. The plaque bore the raised profile of Mother Amandine Sorrel and the words prepared for the centennial observance that afternoon. She kept faith with every soul entrusted to this house. Sister Damaris moved her lips. The word came from the kneeling women behind Sister Imelda. Liar. By 8 o'clock, Dr. Leland Parr had examined every sister in the infirmary and found no fever, no weakness, no sign of poisoning, and no shared neurological defect that he could name. He checked the kitchen gas lines himself and sent a man from the fire department into the boiler room. The coal furnace was cold. The convent's old pipes knocked now and then, but the air was clean. He telephoned Evelyn Cade from the wall phone outside the dispensary. Evelyn had been awake since 6, sitting at the small table in her apartment in Charlestown with a cup of coffee and a stack of county school referral forms. She was 39 and worked as a speech therapist for 3 schools, the county clinic, and, when there was no one else, the diocesan homes between Martinsburg and the Virginia line. Dr. Parr did not describe what had happened. He said only that several elderly women were speaking in an unusual pattern, and that one had suffered what might be a minor stroke. "You know the house," he added. Evelyn looked through her kitchen window at the brightening roofs and said nothing. She did know it. From age 8 to 13, she had climbed the stone walk to Our Lady of the Narrow Mercy every Tuesday and Thursday to be corrected by Sister Damaris. Evelyn's childhood stutter had been severe enough that teachers mistook pauses for ignorance, and strangers finished sentences she had not intended to say. Sister Damaris had cured much of it through breath drills, mirror work, hymns broken into syllables, and a discipline Evelyn remembered more clearly than the lessons themselves. A wrong word had to be begun again. A repeated consonant meant a full sentence was lost. Mercy, Sister Damaris used to say, required exactness. Evelyn had not entered the convent in 26 years. She drove there in her pale green Rambler, with the windows open because the September heat had settled early over the valley. Route signs flashed through the trees. A freight train dragged itself along the river below, iron shrieking against the curve. Harpers Ferry appeared in fragments between wooded slopes. Brick walls, church spires, steep streets, stone steps polished by generations of shoes. The convent stood above the town on a shelf of shale called Laurel Stair. 3 connected buildings of brown stone with a slate roof and a narrow chapel at the eastern end. The sisters had taught girls, nursed the sick, and kept a guest room for women who needed a night behind a locked door. By 1970, there were only 22 nuns left, most of them past 60. Mother Celestine met Evelyn in the front parlor. She was a broad-faced woman of 63, whose calm had the strained neatness of a bed made over a feverish patient. Father Nolan Crew, the diocesan liaison for the centennial ceremony, stood at the mantel with his jacket over one arm. A portable reel-to-reel recorder sat beside a box of programs on the table. Someone had intended to record the afternoon speeches for the Mother House archive. "We have postponed nothing," Father Crew said before Evelyn had removed her gloves. Mother Celestine looked at him. "We have not yet decided. The bishop's secretary is already on the road." Evelyn set down her case. "I was told Sister Damaris may have had a stroke." Father Crew replied. One sister became confused. The others were frightened. "Doctor, Parr has been generous in treating fear as medicine." From the hall behind him came the sound of women saying the first words of a blessing in reverse. Every head in the parlor turned. Sister Perpetua entered, carrying a tray with 4 glasses of water. She was 70 and walked with a stiff left knee. Her lips were closed. The backward blessing continued in her voice from the hall she had just left. Only when the final words sounded did her mouth begin to move, silently repeating the phrase in proper order. One glass slid across the tray without tipping and stopped at the edge nearest Evelyn. Father Crew crossed himself. The water in the glass trembled in 4 perfect circles, one after another, from the rim toward the center. Evelyn did not touch it. She found the affected sisters in the old music room, where high windows overlooked the Shenandoah. They sat in a semicircle beneath faded maps and a chalkboard. Some were frightened. Others appeared embarrassed, as though they had sung from the wrong page in public. Sister Sabina Vine, the youngest at 31, gripped the seat of her chair with both hands. Sister Imelda stood by the door. Evelyn began with ordinary questions: name, date, place. She asked them to count, identify objects, repeat unrelated phrases, describe the picture on a magazine cover. Their speech was normal, accents varied. Memory seemed intact. Then she placed a printed prayer card in Sister Sabina's hand. Sabina's eyes filled before she looked down. "I would rather not." "Why?" "Because I know what will come out, and I will still mean the other thing." "Read only the first line." Sabina pressed her lips together. Her fingers whitened around the card. The answer rose from the far corner of the room in her voice. It was the last line. Sabina began to weep. Her mouth moved a moment later, forming the first. Evelyn asked Sister Imelda to close the door. She set a yellow legal pad on her knee and drew a line down the middle. On the left, she wrote what the sisters intended. On the right, she transcribed what was heard. After 20 minutes, the pattern was undeniable. The women were not reversing sounds. They were not babbling, and they were not speaking Latin backward. Their sentences were reorganized by units of meaning. Objects came before actions. Consequences came before causes. Responses preceded questions. In every prayer, the final assertion was spoken first, and the invocation last. It resembled translation more than disorder. Evelyn asked whether any of the sisters knew sign language. No one answered. At the rear of the room, Sister Damaris lifted her right hand from the blanket over her knees. Her fingers shook. She touched 2 fingertips to her throat, turned her palm toward the floor, and pushed it slowly backward. Evelyn had seen the gesture before, not in any book, not in her training at West Virginia University. She had seen it in this building as a child, when Sister Damaris used hand shapes to teach breath and placement to students who could not make their mouths obey. The sign had meant begin again. Sister Damaris made it twice. Then she pointed toward the bronze plaque leaning against the wall. Begin again, she signed. From the end. Evelyn asked for the room where Sister Damaris had taught speech. Mother Celestine hesitated. The old classrooms had been closed for years, she said. Dust, loose plaster, warped flooring. Father Crew wanted everyone kept in the newer wing until the doctor could exclude contamination. Evelyn replied that if the disorder was learned, prompted, or tied to the convent's routines, then the place where language had been taught mattered as much as the infirmary. Sister Damaris heard them from the hall. She struck the arm of her wheelchair once with the heel of her hand. The room was on the 2nd floor above the kitchen, at the end of a passage that smelled of floor wax and old coal smoke. Mother Celestine unlocked it with a ring of iron keys. Desks stood under canvas covers. A long mirror occupied one wall, its silver backing spoiled into black islands. On a shelf lay wooden tongue depressors, corks, a metronome, boxes of picture cards, and 3 hand mirrors with cracked leather grips. Evelyn remembered sitting before the large glass while Sister Damaris stood behind her, making her watch each failed word arrive. The memory brought back an ache at the base of her jaw. She opened cabinet after cabinet. Most contained school readers and mimeographed exercises. In the lowest drawer of a narrow map case, beneath sheets of blue construction paper, she found 64 heavy cards punched at the corners and tied with cotton tape. Each card showed a pair of hands drawn in dark pencil. Some positions were familiar letters from the manual alphabet. Others were not. Arrows indicated movement from chest to mouth, from one palm to another, from a door shape made by the fingers toward a small drawn figure. The cards were numbered twice. A line of ordinary numerals ran down the left edge from 1 to 64. Along the right edge, written in violet ink, the same sequence descended from 64 to 1. On the back of card 37, someone had written, "Her order is not our order. Do not turn her meaning around to make it fit the mouth." Evelyn carried the cards to the mirror. In the spoiled glass, the drawn hands appeared to move the opposite way. Behind her, the metronome clicked once. Its pendulum was tied in place with string. She turned. The room was empty except for Mother Celestine at the door. The metronome clicked again. This time the sound came before the wooden arm jerked against the string. "Who made these?" Evelyn asked. Mother Celestine looked at the cards and seemed to become older by several years. "There was a sister named Isolde," she said. "Before my time." She could not hear. "Did Sister Damaris work with her?" "I was told they devised signs for instruction. Sister Isolde taught children who could not speak. Sister Damaris interpreted for her." "What happened to her?" "She left." The answer came too quickly. Evelyn waited. Mother Celestine's fingers tightened around the key ring. "The account in the House Chronicle says she broke confidence with a woman under protection. She disclosed an entrance that was meant to remain secret. The woman was taken from the convent by her family. Sister Isolde denied it, but there had been a hearing. And Damaris interpreted." "Yes." From the stairwell below came a sound like a row of chairs being pushed back one after another. They found all 13 affected sisters standing in the west corridor. No one had summoned them. Their shoes were aligned with the seams in the floorboards, toes pointed toward the chapel, faces turned toward the front entrance. Sister Sabina stood first. Her eyes were closed. She took one step backward. The others followed. Their procession moved away from the chapel, through the front hall, and toward the door. Mother Celestine ordered them to stop. Sister Imelda caught Sister Sabina's elbow. Sabina's body continued with such force that both women nearly fell. Evelyn stepped into the procession and asked Sabina what she was doing. "I don't know," Sabina whispered. "I can feel a door behind me." "There is no door behind you." "There was." She took another backward step. Her heel struck the threshold. The convent's front door opened without being touched. Outside, the noon heat lay white on the stone walk. Cicadas screamed in the locust trees. The sisters descended the front steps backward, one at a time, their hands extended slightly from their sides, as if expecting walls that no longer stood. Evelyn and Sister Imelda followed. The procession crossed the courtyard, passed the kitchen garden, and entered a narrow strip of ground between the chapel and the retaining wall. There, the sisters stopped before a blank section of stone. Sister Sabina raised both hands. Her right hand formed the shape of a narrow arch. Her left hand moved through it, palm down. Then the left hand snapped shut as though caught. All 12 sisters behind her made the same sign. A crack appeared in the retaining wall. It was no wider than a thread at first. Dust trembled from it. The crack curved upward, descended, and completed the outline of a low doorway that had been mortared shut. The stone within the outline was older and darker than the rest, though no one had noticed it that morning. Mother Celestine whispered, "The river stair." Father Crew, who had followed from the house, said the passage had been sealed before the war because of instability. He insisted the outline had always been visible. No one agreed with him, but no one challenged him. Sister Sabina's hands moved again. Evelyn consulted the cards. The nearest drawing was number 52. One palm offered forward, the other withdrawing behind the back. "What does that mean?" Sister Imelda asked. Evelyn looked at the violet instruction on the reverse. "She is saying, 'Given after promised.' That makes no sense. In the other order, it does. Promised, then given." Something struck the sealed doorway from within. Not a fist. The sound was flatter, lighter, repeated in a rapid pattern. Hands. The nuns turned together and began walking forward toward the convent. As they passed Evelyn, each one whispered a single word. The words seemed unrelated until she wrote them in the order they were spoken and then read from bottom to top. They formed a sentence. She did not leave by choice. Father Crew took the page from Evelyn's hand. "This is suggestion. One woman says a word. The next builds on it." The first woman could not have known the last word. People in religious communities anticipate one another. "So do choirs," Evelyn said. "They still begin together, not at the end." He folded the page once and put it in his pocket. That afternoon, the centennial guests were turned away with a notice of illness. The bronze plaque remained in the front parlor, under a folded altar cloth. Mother Celestine telephoned the mother house, then the bishop's office, then a lawyer in Martinsburg. Dr. Parr arranged for blood samples and made notes in a black composition book. He found no sign of seizure in Damaris and no physical cause for the other sister's speech. Evelyn stayed. At 3, the convent's electric clocks stopped, not at the same time, but in reverse order from the newest wing to the oldest. The clocks were not important to the prayers, Evelyn told herself. They were merely another symptom of a building full of frightened people watching for patterns. She refused to write them down. At 4:10, Sister Perpetua cut her thumb while slicing peaches. The cut did not bleed. Instead, a thin red line appeared on the knife, then withdrew into the fruit. 30 seconds later, the skin of her thumb opened from one end to the other and began bleeding normally. At 4:30, The kitchen sisters watched 6 peeled peaches regain their skins beneath their hands. At 5, the convent prepared for Vespers without deciding to do so. The sisters left conversations in mid-sentence. They set down cups and folded towels. Those in the infirmary rose from beds. Sister Damaris pushed away the hand that tried to steady her and walked with a dragging right foot. Every nun in the house entered the chapel, including 7 who had not spoken backward that morning. Evelyn stood in the rear with Dr. Parr, Mother Celestine, Father Crew, and Sister Imelda. The chapel was narrow, with dark oak stalls facing one another, and an iron screen separating the sisters' choir from the public nave. The screen had no images, only vertical bars interrupted by small square openings at hand level. Afternoon light from the western windows lay across the floor like long, pale boards. The sisters knelt. The final response of Vespers came first. Their voices were perfectly synchronized, but their shadows were not. The shadows rose from kneeling one by one, starting with the last woman in the choir and moving toward the first. They stood while the bodies remained down. Then each shadow turned its back to the altar. The nuns continued. As the prayer moved backward, impressions appeared in the cushions of the empty stalls. 20, 30, perhaps 40 invisible women seemed to kneel among the living. The iron screen gave a faint metallic complaint. Through its square openings, pale shapes pressed from the choir side. At first, Evelyn mistook them for folded cloth. They were hands, dozens of them, visible only from wrist to fingertip, resting against the openings, as if a crowd stood inside the woodwork of the wall. Some were young. Some were knotted with age. All faced palm down. Sister Damaris began to choke. Evelyn moved forward, but Sister Imelda seized her sleeve. "Listen." Beneath the reversed prayer ran another voice, too soft to identify as male or female. It didn't speak words. It made the dry, intimate sounds of palms turning, fingers striking fingers, nails brushing skin. A language without breath. Sister Damaris raised her hands toward the screen. Her fingers tried to form a sign and failed. The ghostly hands behind the iron copied her failure. Father Crew stepped into the aisle and began a prayer in the proper order. On his third word, every nun stopped. The chapel answered him in his own voice from behind the altar. No. His mouth remained open. The next word that came from it wasn't part of his prayer. "I saw no key," he said. His face emptied in shock. "I saw no woman," his voice continued. "I heard no promise. Isolde closed the stair. Isolde gave her over." Father Crew clutched his throat. He tried to say Mother Celestine's name. "I was 19, he said instead. "I was afraid." Sister Damaris stared at him. The forward prayer had made him her mouth. Father Crew could still breathe. His pulse remained steady. But for nearly an hour, every sentence he attempted became a denial, spoken in Sister Damaris's younger voice. Dr. Parr led him to the sacristy and told him not to force words. Mother Celestine ordered the chapel closed. The order had no effect. At 6:12, all 22 nuns returned to the refectory and consumed supper backward. They did not vomit food or perform any grotesque reversal of the body. The horror was quieter. Empty spoons rose from bowls before hands reached them. Bread appeared bitten before it touched a mouth. A cup made the sound of being set down while it was still being lifted. Each action arrived with its consequence already present, as though the convent had ceased to trust causes. Evelyn sat beside Sister Damaris and placed the numbered handcards between them. "Isolde made these," she said. Damaris looked toward Mother Celestine. "You are not answering her," Evelyn continued. "You are answering me." The old nun's mouth tightened. Evelyn remembered that expression from childhood, the warning that a pupil had chosen the least forgivable error, not inability, but defiance. Did Isolde betray a woman under sanctuary? Damaris's left hand lifted. One finger touched her chest. Her right palm turned outward. The movement was unfinished, but Evelyn found its match on card 18. I said it. Did you say Isolde betrayed her? Damaris closed her eyes. Her hands formed yes. Mother Celestine left the table. Evelyn followed her to the front parlor. The bronze plaque had been uncovered. The afternoon light made Mother Amandine's profile appear to be emerging from the metal. Mother Celestine stood over it with both hands on the table. I became superior in 1961, she said. By then, Sister Damaris was already spoken of as the conscience of this house. She trained teachers. She sat with the dying. She could make a frightened child speak. When the Centennial Committee asked for memories of Mother Amandine, Damaris supplied the sentence on that plaque. She supplied the lie that woke this. You cannot know that. The plaque was in her arms when it began. Mother Celestine turned the bronze over. Fixed to the back with 4 new screws was a small cloth pouch, placed there by the archivist so a relic associated with Mother Amandine could remain with the memorial. Mother Celestine opened it. Inside lay a silver pin shaped like a narrow leaf. Its point was bent. A strip of dark green fabric clung beneath the clasp. The sanctuary pin, she said. Women received at the convent for protection had once been given green wool shawls fastened with that pin. While wearing it, a guest was not to be named to callers, surrendered to relatives, or questioned by anyone outside the house. The custom had ended during the Second World War. Mother Celestine had believed the pin belonged to Amandine because it was found in her desk after her death. Evelyn held it beneath the lamp. A brown stain darkened the hinge. Who was the woman? Eudora Kells. The surname was still present in Harpers Ferry, though not on any storefront. Orrin Kells had served as a magistrate and county delegate before the war. His house on Bolivar Heights had been demolished in the 1950s. Mother Celestine knew the public account. Eudora, his younger sister, had become unstable after accusing him of killing a prisoner. She fled her family, set fire to a records room, and was sheltered briefly by the convent. Sister Isolde disclosed the river stair. Orrin removed Eudora under a court order. She died several months later in a private hospital in Maryland. How much of that came through Damaris? Evelyn asked. Mother Celestine did not answer. Evelyn telephoned Abram Weather just after 7. She found his number in an old county directory in the schoolroom. Abram lived near the lower town in a narrow frame house where the noise of trains crossed every conversation. He was 74, deaf from birth, and had worked most of his life repairing leather harness and luggage. Evelyn remembered his name from a note on the back of one handcard. Ask Abram why Isolde changed the sign for door. He opened his door before Evelyn knocked, having felt the vibration of her steps on the porch. His white hair was cut close. He wore suspenders over a clean blue shirt and watched her mouth only until she raised the handcards. Then he took them from her with both hands and sat down. Evelyn knew the manual alphabet and enough conversational sign to work with deaf children, but Abram's signs were older, local, shaped by Isolde, and by years when no teacher had standardized what families invented for themselves. They communicated slowly. He corrected her without impatience. Isolde Vey, he told her, had not been born to the convent. She came from a farm west of town and entered at 23. She could read lips poorly and wrote well, but within the convent, she depended on Damaris, then a young teacher with a gift for gesture. Together, they built a private vocabulary for prayer, work, names, intention, and witness. Isolde later taught it to Abram and 6 other deaf children in the lower town. The sign for door had changed after Eudora Kells. Before 1938, a door was shown as two upright hands opening away from the body. Afterward, Isolde signed door as one hand held open, while the other closed around the wrist. Abram stood and went to a cabinet. From beneath old tax receipts and spools of waxed thread, he removed a strip of wood no longer than a ruler. Small dents covered it in pairs. Isolde had used it during lessons. Each pair marked where two fingers struck when making a sign against a table, so that deaf pupils could feel the rhythm. One sequence had been carved deeper than the rest. Abram demonstrated. Woman protected. Amandine removed Silverleaf, gave Oren. Damaris held my hands. Stare opened from inside. Evelyn asked whether Isolde had seen what happened to Eudora. Abram's expression changed. He signed, "She saw Eudora return, not taken away. Return." Near midnight on the night of September 14th, 1938, Isolde saw Eudora come back through the river stair alone. Her green shawl was torn, and the sanctuary pin was gone. Eudora had escaped her brother's men. She carried no records and no weapon. She asked to be hidden again. Mother Amandine refused. The convent had already accepted Oren's money to repair the infirmary roof and had signed a statement declaring Eudora unstable. To admit her again would expose the bargain. Amandine ordered the river stair sealed. Damaris stood with her in the courtyard, while Eudora pounded on the exterior door. Isolde tried to open it. Damaris and two others restrained her hands. By morning, Eudora was gone. 3 days later, a woman's coat was found below the railroad embankment. No body was recovered. Oren claimed his sister had fled west. The convent said Isolde had invented the return to conceal her first betrayal. At the diocesan hearing, Damaris interpreted Isolde's signs. She reversed the subjects and objects. Isolde signed, "Amandine gave Oren the pin." Damaris said, "Isolde gave Eudora to Oren." Isolde signed, "Damaris held my hands while Eudora called." Damaris said, "I held Damaris back while Eudora escaped." Isolde signed, "The stair was closed from inside." Damaris said, "I opened the stair from inside." The hearing concluded that Isolde had violated sanctuary and fabricated accusations. She was not expelled because public expulsion might draw questions. Instead, she was confined to the convent's upper rooms, forbidden to teach and forbidden to sign in community. Abram's hands slowed. For 7 months, he said, Isolde's wrists were wrapped during chapel, so she could not disturb prayer with accusation. The sisters recited a formal act in which Isolde supposedly renounced her testimony and accepted correction. Damaris had written the act from her false translation. Isolde could not hear the words. She saw only the mouths of the women around her and the final Amen. One morning she was gone. The House Chronicle said she left voluntarily. Abram did not believe it. She came to him once, 2 years later, thin and ill, wearing ordinary clothes. She would not say where she had been. She signed one sentence before leaving Harpers Ferry forever. A prayer cannot face God while its witness faces the wall. Evelyn wrote the sentence on her pad. Abram touched the page, shook his head, and turned it around. He had not meant witness as a person standing nearby. Isolde's sign meant the part of a statement that makes it true. A prayer cannot face God while its truth faces the wall. When Evelyn returned to the convent, night had filled the valley. Yellow rectangles of light showed along the stone facade. The sealed river stair was visible from the road now, a black arch traced through mortar. As she entered the courtyard, she heard all 22 nuns reciting lauds. Lauds belonged to morning. They were moving backward through the day. Inside, Father Crew sat silent in the parlor, a pencil and notepad before him. He had written 3 sentences. The voice is hers. It will not let me say what she did not say. Matins is the beginning. Mother Celestine had assembled the House Chronicle, the 1938 Council Book, and a carbon copy of the diocesan hearing. Evelyn read them at the long refectory table while the nuns' voices moved through the building. The public record supported the accusation against Isolde, but the language of the hearing contained a flaw no one had noticed. Every statement attributed to Isolde arranged in tension after consequence. The stare was opened because I disclosed it, appeared, where ordinary testimony would have stated disclosure first. Eudora was taken because I failed obedience, placed judgment before action. The pattern was identical to the backward prayers. Damaris had not merely lied about the content, she had forced Isolde's language into an order that made guilt appear natural. At 1:30 in the morning, Sister Sabina screamed from the west corridor. Evelyn found her standing before the sealed river stair, though no one had seen her leave the dormitory. Her night veil hung from one hand. Both wrists were bound with strips of white linen torn from the infirmary. She had wrapped them herself so tightly that her fingers were purple. "Take them off," Evelyn said. Sabina shook her head. A voice sounded from behind the stone door, not backward, not in prayer. A woman struck the other side with both hands and cried, "Please!" Sabina answered in Damaris's young voice, "No one is there." The linen tightened by itself. Sister Imelda cut it with bandage scissors. As the cloth fell, dark marks appeared around the wrists of every nun in the corridor. Dr. Parr examined them and whispered that pressure bruises could not travel from one body to another. Father Crew wrote on his pad, "It is making them the community that watched." Mother Celestine stared at the women under her care. "How long?" Evelyn looked at the sequence of reversed offices and at the old schedule posted inside the refectory cupboard. "It began at the end of the day. It has passed backward through Vespers and Lauds. If it reaches Matins, it reaches the first prayer they said over Isolde." "When?" "Before dawn." Outside, a train entered the tunnel below the town. Its horn sounded once, then again from farther down the track. The second sound came first. They had less than 3 hours. Evelyn spread Isolde's cards across the refectory floor in their forward order. Abram arrived at 2:15, brought by Dr. Parr in the doctor's fort after Evelyn telephoned his hearing neighbor, who carried the message across the porch. He entered the convent with a small overnight case and the wooden rhythm strip under his arm. The nuns were gathering for another office somewhere above them. Their first words descended through the ceiling after their final words had already moved through the walls. Abram studied the bruises around Sister Sabina's wrists, then looked at Damaris. For a long time, neither moved. Damaris had taught him his first written sentences. He had once trusted her hands more than he trusted any speaking person's mouth. When she tried to sign his name, he caught her wrist before she finished. "Not anger," his hands told her. "Not yet." He placed the wooden strip on the table and tapped Isolde's testimony into it. The old nun watched the rhythm travel through the grain. Her shoulders began to shake. Mother Celestine asked Evelyn what had to be done. "The false statement was given to the whole community as one woman's translation," Evelyn said. "No one else was allowed to understand Isolde directly. If one of us translates Damaris now, and everyone else merely repeats it, we build the same arrangement again." Then how can 22 women learn a language before dawn? They do not need the whole language. They need the testimony. Abram divided the sequence into 22 parts. Each nun received one motion or brief clause: a hand opening, a pin removed, a promise made, a wrist held, a door closed from within, a woman returning, a plea denied. A witness turned toward the wall. The sisters practiced in the refectory without speech, facing one another in 2 rows. The backward voices in the upper rooms became louder. Sister Perpetua forgot which direction pain traveled. She touched a bruise before it appeared and cried out only when it faded. Sister Imelda tried to ask Dr. Parr for gauze and said, "We need none," while pointing frantically at a bleeding palm. Every denial Damaris had spoken in 1938 was finding a living mouth. Father Crew remained unable to pray aloud. He wrote that the bishop's secretary had turned back at the locked gate after hearing women inside the chapel answer questions he had not asked. The telephone rang repeatedly. Each time, the caller's goodbye was heard before the receiver was lifted. At 2:40, Mother Celestine ordered the bronze plaque carried into the chapel. She removed the sanctuary pin from its pouch and fastened it to a length of green wool cut from an old altar storage cover. The act was not historically exact, but Abram nodded. The promise had been represented by a visible object. It had been removed in secret. It would now be restored in witness. Damaris refused to enter the chapel. Her wheelchair stopped at the threshold as though its front wheels had met a wall. Dr. Parr and Sister Imelda tried to push, but the chair rolled backward from their hands. Damaris gripped the arms and stared through the iron screen. The pale hands were waiting there. They filled every square opening, stacked one above another, where no living bodies could have stood. All were turned palm down. Along the choir stalls, the cushions sank beneath invisible knees. Evelyn crouched beside Damaris. "You wrote the sentence on the plaque." Damaris nodded. "You put the lie back into the house." Another nod. "Did you know what would happen?" "No." "Did Isolde curse you?" Damaris's hands formed a difficult answer. "No curse." She pointed to the chapel, then to her mouth, then reversed both palms. "Our prayer." The convent had made the thing itself, not through witchcraft, not through a formula hidden in Isolde's signs, but by taking a communal prayer and using it to sanctify a reversed truth. The words had been spoken before an altar, accepted by authority, entered into the house chronicle, and repeated whenever Isolde's name arose. The prayer had been forced to carry a lie for 32 years. The memorial sentence had asked it to carry the lie forever. Now, it was returning every word to its source. "What happens at Matins?" Evelyn asked. Damaris looked at the waiting hands. Her answer required several attempts. "We do it again." The current sisters would not merely remember the old betrayal, they would enact it. One would become Isolde. One would become Eudora outside the wall. The others would repeat the renunciation. Damaris would translate the lie again, and the convent would seal the truth so completely that every prayer spoken there afterward would begin with its ending. "What happens to the woman outside?" Mother Celestine asked. Damaris pointed toward Sister Sabina, the youngest nun. Sabina stepped back from the screen. "Why me?" Damaris signed. Because Eudora was younger than the promise. No one understood the phrase, but Sabina did. She covered her mouth. At 3, the first knock sounded from the river stair. At 3:01, a second knock came from the chapel wall. At 3:02, the same knock sounded beneath the refectory floor. They were moving backward toward the room where the betrayal had begun. Mother Celestine assigned each sister her place in the testimony. She did not offer encouragement. She did not call the act healing or penance. She checked every hand position and made the women repeat it until Abram approved. The discipline of the convent, which had once enforced silence, became the means by which they learned to witness without a single appointed mouth. Evelyn worked with Damaris. The old nun's fingers were twisted by arthritis, and the right side of her body remained weak from the episode that morning. The sign for betray required one hand to offer an open palm, while the other turned it away. Damaris could not complete it. Her thumb locked. Her wrist trembled. As a child, Evelyn had been made to repeat mercy until the first consonant no longer caught in her throat. Sister Damaris had stood behind her, patient and merciless, saying that a word belonged to the speaker only after the speaker could control it. Now Evelyn held Damaris's stiff hand between both of hers. "You do not control what it means," she said. "You only say what you did." Damaris looked at her, and for the first time, Evelyn saw shame without authority around it. They practiced until the hand turned. At 3:27, the convent lights went out. The chapel remained visible. A pallid glow rose through the floorboards, not moonlight and not electricity. It showed every scratch in the oak and every worn place where generations of knees had rested. Beyond the western windows, Harpers Ferry had vanished behind a white thickness that seemed too solid to be fog. The freight tracks below produced no sound. The rivers could not be heard. The nuns entered the choir in silence. Mother Celestine stood at the front with the green wool and silver pin. Abram and Evelyn remained in the public nave. Dr. Parr supported Father Crew, who carried the original hearing transcript. Sister Sabina stood nearest the door. Damaris sat alone before the iron screen. The first line of matins came from the ceiling. It was the final line. Every nun's mouth opened. They began to pray backward. The iron screen grew cold enough to whiten with frost despite the heat. The pale hands withdrew from the square openings. For one hopeful second, Evelyn thought they had gone. Then they returned from the living side. The hands of the nuns rose against their will and pushed through the openings toward Damaris. 22 pairs reached for her wrists. She cried out. Father Crew tried to command the presence to stop. His mouth spoke Damaris's denial instead. Isolde asked to be corrected. The hearing transcript tore itself from his hands. Its pages flew across the chapel and fastened to the screen, one sheet over each opening. Words showed through the paper backward. Behind them, the pale hands pressed until the outlines of fingernails appeared. The prayer continued toward its beginning. Sister Sabina walked backward down the center aisle. The chapel door opened behind her. Beyond it was not the convent corridor, but the courtyard as it had been in 1938. The locust trees were smaller. Rain shone on the stones, though the present night was dry. A young woman in a torn green shawl stood outside the distant river stair door, striking it with both palms. Eudora Kells had no wound visible on her. That made the sight worse. She was alive, exhausted, and close enough to believe the promise still existed. Sabina's feet crossed the chapel threshold into the old courtyard. Mother Celestine moved to catch her. The nuns' voices changed. "No one is there," they said in reverse order. Mother Celestine was thrown backward into the choir stall. Evelyn reached through the iron screen and seized Damaris's hand. "Now!" Damaris raised her fingers. The first sign was I. Nothing changed. Abram struck Isolde's rhythm into the wooden strip. The impact traveled through the chapel floor. Sister Imelda saw her assigned movement and signed woman. Sister Perpetua signed protected. Another sister formed promise. The testimony passed from hand to hand, along both rows. The backward prayer grew louder, trying to cover the silence. As each sign was completed, one sheet of the hearing transcript fell from the screen. The words on it had altered. Isolde opened, became Amandine closed. Eudora fled, became Eudora returned. I restrained Damaris, became Damaris restrained me. The old courtyard sharpened beyond the door. Mother Amandine appeared beside the river stair, younger than the bronze profile, her face strained by fear rather than cruelty. Orrin Kells stood outside the wall in a dark coat. He held no weapon. He held a paper bearing the county seal and a packet of banknotes. Amandine removed the silver sanctuary pin from Eudora's shawl and placed it in his palm. The living Mother Celestine fastened the pin to the strip of green wool. The ghost of Amandine turned. For a moment, the two superiors faced one another across 32 years. Mother Celestine signed, "Promise broken." The sanctuary pin burned black against the wool. The testimony moved on. Damaris signed. I held her hands. The pale hands behind the screen seized Damaris's wrists. This time, she did not pull away. The chapel filled with the sound of linen winding around skin. White bands appeared around Damaris's hands, wrapping from fingertips to elbow. The same bands formed around the ghostly arms pressing through the screen. Within the old courtyard, Isolde became visible. She was younger than Evelyn expected, with a long grave face and dark hair hidden under her veil. 2 nuns held her elbows. Damaris, 19 years old, stood before her and closed both hands around Isolde's fingers whenever she tried to sign. The old Damaris watched herself. Her mouth opened. The backward prayer forced out another denial. I protected the house. Evelyn tightened her grip. That is the reason. Not the truth. Damaris bent over her bound hands. Then, with a movement that tore the linen from her skin, she completed the sign for betray. I betrayed her. The words came forward. They were the first forward words spoken in prayer since the disturbance began. Every nun stopped. The silence struck the chapel like a physical blow. The western windows cracked in a line from top to bottom. Father Crew fell to his knees, coughing, as Damaris's borrowed voice left him. Sister Sabina remained suspended at the threshold, 1 foot in 1970 and 1 in the rain of 1938. From outside the old river stair, Eudora called again. Please. Isolde turned toward the door. The living sisters completed the testimony with their hands. Amandine removed the sign of sanctuary. Damaris reversed the witness. The community spoke the reversal as prayer. Eudora returned. We left her outside. Isolde did not renounce her testimony. The final sign belonged to Mother Celestine. She faced Sister Sabina, not the altar. We see the door. The sealed river stair burst inward. No stones flew. The wall opened by shedding 32 years of mortar in soft gray sheets. Behind it lay a descending passage, scarcely 3 feet wide. Wet leaves covered the steps. At the bottom stood the exterior door Eudora had struck in 1938. It was still locked from inside. Mother Celestine walked from the chapel, crossed the courtyard, and descended with the green shawl over her arms. Evelyn followed with a flashlight, though the pale light from the chapel reached down the stair. Abram came behind her. Damaris insisted on walking. Sister Imelda supported one side of her, Dr. Parr the other. At the bottom, the iron latch was wrapped in rotted linen, not to keep intruders out, to prevent someone inside from opening it. Damaris touched the cloth. Her hands remembered the knot. She unwrapped it in the forward order, loop by loop, while above them, the nuns held the last unfinished breath of matins. When the latch lifted, the door opened onto darkness and the smell of wet stone. There was no ghost waiting outside. Only a shallow recess cut into the retaining wall and a green wool shawl collapsed upon the ground. Eudora had not died there. She had left the shawl after the second refusal and gone down toward the railroad embankment. Whether she reached safety, the rivers, or her brother's men remained unknown. The convent had invented certainty in both directions. Oren said she escaped. The sisters allowed people to presume she died. Neither account had been witnessed. Beneath the shawl lay a small object wrapped in oilcloth. Evelyn opened it. It was a folded piece of paper in Eudora's hand, protected from damp by the cloth. The message contained no accusation, no proof of Oren's crime, no final curse. It read, "I came back because you said the door would remain mine." Mother Celestine bowed her head. Damaris made one last sign toward the open passage. "Not hers," she corrected. "Ours to keep open." They carried the shawl and note into the chapel. Sister Sabina stepped fully back into 1970. The rain of 1938 withdrew from the doorway. The younger trees disappeared. Isolde remained before the screen. She raised her hands. Abram answered first, then Evelyn. Then each nun in the choir repeated the sign Isolde had been denied the right to make. True. Isolde's wrists were no longer bound. She turned toward Damaris. The old nun waited for forgiveness and did not receive it. Isolde touched 2 fingers to her own eyes, pointed to Damaris, and turned her palm outward. See what you did? Damaris nodded. That was enough for the prayer. Mother Celestine began matins again in the proper order. Her voice shook on the first line. The sisters answered one by one rather than together. Some stammered. Some lost their place. Sister Sabina could barely speak above a whisper. No answer came before its call. When they reached Amen, dawn had begun to show over Maryland Heights. The pale hands withdrew from the screen. The empty choir cushions rose. The final word remained where it belonged. The official explanation given that week was a combination of heat, exhaustion, and an undiagnosed illness among elderly members of the community. No newspaper printed the account of the reversed prayers. Father Crew returned the bishop's secretary's calls and said only that the centennial observance had been canceled permanently. The bronze plaque was never mounted. Mother Celestine removed Mother Amandine's portrait from the front parlor and placed Eudora's note beneath glass beside the open entrance to the river stair. She also added the complete 1938 hearing transcript, with every alteration marked in red by Evelyn and verified through Isolde's surviving handcards. The house chronicle was not destroyed. Mother Celestine said destruction would allow a later superior to claim there had been nothing to correct. For 1 year, the sisters did not pray in unison. The offices were spoken by individual voices in sequence, with time left between them for error, breath, and dissent. Visitors found the practice awkward. Several diocesan officials objected. Mother Celestine continued it anyway. Sister Damaris lived for 9 days after the night in the chapel. Her speech did not return. Neither did her authority. She communicated with the handcards, never asking anyone to soften what she meant. Abram visited twice. On the second visit, he placed Isolde's wooden rhythm strip beside her bed. Damaris touched the carved sequence and signed a question. Did she hate me? Abram considered before answering. She stopped trusting you. Damaris closed her eyes. She died the following morning while Sister Imelda sat beside her. No prayer reversed. No voice came from another room. At the funeral, Mother Celestine did not call her a faithful interpreter. She said that Damaris had done good in many lives and committed one betrayal that her good works could not rename. Evelyn attended from the last pew. Her childhood stutter returned that autumn, but only on words connected to certainty. Always. Never. Obedience. Mercy. She could speak them if she slowed down and allowed the first sound to fail without beginning the whole sentence again. Her patients noticed that she no longer completed their words for them. She kept Isolde's cards in a locked cabinet at the county clinic and taught copies of the signs to children who needed them, with Abram's permission and his corrections. No record ever established what happened to Eudora Kells after she left the shawl outside the stair. A passenger list placed a woman of her age on a bus to Pittsburgh, but the name was different and the handwriting could not be confirmed. Mother Celestine refused to turn uncertainty into a comforting survival story. In the convent register, she wrote only that Eudora returned, was denied sanctuary, and left by an unwitnessed road. Sister Sabina remained at Our Lady of the Narrow Mercy. For the rest of her life, she could not walk backward even one step. If a crowded room forced her to do so, her legs locked and she fell. She became portress and kept the river stair unsealed. Women still came to the convent at night, though fewer as the sisters aged. Sabina never asked for a caller's full account before opening the door. The house declined slowly through the 1970s. Classrooms closed. The kitchen garden went wild. Trains continued to shake the windows, and tourists filled the lower streets in summer. By 1982, only 6 sisters remained. The diocese transferred them and sold the convent to a historical foundation under a condition Mother Celestine had placed in the deed. The river stair could not be sealed. Workers converted the schoolrooms into offices and left the chapel untouched. The iron screen remained between nave and choir. The bronze plaque lay face down in a storage cabinet because no one wanted to display it and no one was willing to melt it. In September 1987, a guide led a group through the empty building. He had learned the respectable version of the convent's history from an early brochure. Standing in the front parlor, he told the visitors that Mother Amandine Sorel had protected every woman entrusted to her and had never surrendered a guest to outside authority. At that moment, every kneeler in the locked chapel moved backward 1 inch. The guide heard the scrape through 2 stone walls. He stopped speaking. The visitors waited for him to continue. From behind the chapel door came the voices of many women, calm and patient in the dark. They said, "Amen." Then, in the silence that followed, someone on the other side drew breath to begin.